I am not an architect, an art historian, or an artist. However, as a physician with an interest in functional anatomy, I have always been fascinated with the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci. In my view, da Vinci is showing us how the body relates to the infinite cosmos in general, and how we can have access to that if we understand the inner workings of the body. In particular, I believe da Vinci is trying to display spinal alignment exercises, which, if followed, not only leads to an understanding of one's physical, but also one's spiritual center of balance. The Vitruvian Man is named after Vitruvius, an architect who lived in the 1st century BC and died in 15 AD. Vitruvius wrote a classic text called On Architecture, in which he detailed how the human body was responsible for the basic geometric forms on which architecture is based, specifically the circle and the square. Here's what Vitruvius wrote about the human body from Book 3, Chapter 1, titled On Symmetry, in Temples and in the Human Body. Section 1. The design of a temple depends on symmetry, the principles of which must be carefully observed by the architect. They are due to proportion. Proportion is a correspondence among the measures of an entire work, and of the whole to a certain part as standard. From this result the principles of symmetry. Without symmetry and proportion, there can be no principles in the design of any temple. That is, if there is no precise relation between its members, as in the case of a well-shaped man. Section 3. Similarly, in the members of a temple, there ought to be the greatest harmony in the symmetrical relations of the different parts of the general magnitude of the whole. Then again, in the human body, the central point is naturally the navel, for if a man be placed flat on his back, with his hands and feet extended, and a pair of compasses centered at his navel, the fingers and toes of his 2 hands and feet will touch the circumference of a circle described therefrom. And just as the human body yields a circular outline, so too a square figure may be found from it. For, if we measure the distance from the soles of the feet to the top of the head, and then apply the measure to the outstretched arms, the breadth will be found to be the same as the height, as in the case of plane surfaces, which are perfectly square. Section 4. Therefore, since nature has designed the human body so that its members are duly proportioned to the frame as a whole, it appears that the ancients had good reason for their rule, that in the perfect buildings the different members must be in exact symmetrical relations to the whole general scheme. Hence, while transmitting to us the proper arrangements for buildings of all kinds, they were particularly careful to do so in the case of temples of the gods, buildings in which merits and faults usually last forever. Through these words, Vitruvius is stating that the human body itself is a marvelous temple of creation. Many artists have tried to explain Vitruvius's work through their own drawings, but some of the results do not look anatomically accurate. The primary reason for this is because they use the same center for both the circle and the square. However, Leonardo realized that the square and the circle had to have different centers. While the center of the circle remained in the navel, the center of the square was a little lower, right above the inguinal region. This allowed Leonardo not only to create a more anatomically accurate model, but it also allowed him to square the circle. That is, the volume inside the square and the volume inside the circle are nearly identical. I believe the circle represents the Vitruvian man on his back lying down, while the square is when he is standing. I state this because when Vitruvius wrote his treatise, he specifically stated that the circle is when the person is lying down on the ground. Further, the circular position would almost be impossible to really achieve in a vertical environment. However, I think the square represents the Vitruvian man in a standing position. I state this because the Vitruvian man almost looks as he is standing, looking at the viewer directly. The position of the Vitruvian man's feet is especially telling, particularly in the square. The left foot is in a turned-out position, similar to the way a ballet dancer creates a basic ballet position. As in ballet, the leg turnout occurs at the hip joint, and the knee and the foot are facing in the same direction. By having the left foot and knee turned out, but turning the body so that it faces the viewer, forces a rotation of the hip, and the core muscles of the body are activated for postural stability. Standing in such a position with one's arms stretched out will take pressure off the interscapular and shoulder region of the individual and allow it to fall down further close to the inguinal region. This allows for a more natural spinal alignment. Leonardo da Vinci referred to the human body as a cosmography of the microcosm. Cosmography is a map of the universe itself, and I believe Da Vinci is telling us that a map of the universe and all its wonder can be experienced in an awareness of the human body and allowing oneself to focus on one's center. It is as if Da Vinci is telling us that the human body is a temple or vehicle through which we experience life, but that the vehicle itself can allow us to experience the cosmic wonder as well. I see similarity in Da Vinci's drawing to the way many neuroscientists view the human brain. For instance, in Antonio Damasio's book Self Comes to Mind, Constructing the Conscious Brain, he writes, "The representation of the world external to the body can come into the brain only via the body itself, namely via its surface. The body and the surrounding environment interact with each other, and the changes caused in the body by that interaction are mapped in the brain. It is certainly true that the mind learns of the outside world via the brain, but it is equally true that the brain can be informed only via the body." That is, that the human brain relies on a real or projected human body in order to understand the world in which it finds itself. For instance, there is a homunculus in the human brain, which is intimately associated with different parts of the body. Homunculus itself means little man, almost as if there is a little man inside the human brain with which it understands its world. It is similar to when a person plays a point-of-view video game and there is an avatar created. Oftentimes the video player will view the back of the head of the avatar, and the avatar gives a spatial dimension or an understanding of where the person is playing in the game itself. Thus, through the Vitruvian man, I believe Da Vinci is telling us that the human body, this cosmography of the microcosm, is a vehicle through which consciousness itself understands its world, and we, as sentient individuals who dwell inside this body, can have access to this wonder if we allow ourselves to become aware of our physical and spiritual centers of balance.